The woman who entered Ares' command was a study in beige. Her clothes were functional, her hair was tied back without style, and her face was a map of roads less traveled, etched not by age but by distance. She carried a single, slim briefcase and a silence that was more profound than the humming of the facility's climate control. The guard at the gate scanned her ID, Ilara Kovac, civilian consultant, with an indifference reserved for janitorial staff and low-level contractors. He waved her through without meeting her eyes. Inside, the base was a cathedral of modern warfare, all brushed steel, holographic displays, and the quiet, purposeful stride of uniformed personnel. A young lieutenant, his posture ramrod straight and his expression radiating the smug certainty of his rank, glanced at her papers and pointed down a long, white corridor. "Colonel Vance's office is at the end. He's expecting you. Try not to get lost." He turned away before she could respond, already absorbed in a data stream on his wrist-mounted device. Ilara didn't watch him go. She simply began walking, her steps measured and silent on the polished floor. Her presence was a disruption to the base's aesthetic, a speck of analog dust in a relentlessly digital world. She registered the subtle shifts in air pressure from the maglev transport tubes, the faint scent of ozone from the server farms, the almost imperceptible vibration in the floor that spoke of the fusion core deep below. This place was a machine, and she knew how to listen to machines. As she walked, her fingers brushed against the inside of her left wrist, a subconscious gesture tracing a shape hidden beneath her sleeve. A small, faded tattoo of a serpent coiled into a figure 9, so faint it was little more than a whisper on her skin. Colonel Vance did not stand when she entered. He remained seated behind a vast desk of black composite, a throne from which he commanded a constellation of tactical displays. His eyes, sharp and impatient, flicked from a screen to the thin paper file in front of him. Ilara Kovac. He said her name as if it were an anomaly in his system. The directive from command simply states you are an analog systems analyst in a facility where the coffee machine is networked to a predictive supply algorithm. What, precisely, does an analog analyst do? His tone wasn't just skeptical. It was weary, burdened by what he clearly saw as a bureaucratic folly. He gestured vaguely at the shimmering displays around him. "We operate the most sophisticated aerospace defense grid on the planet. Our systems are predictive, self-healing, and layered with quantum encryption. There are no analog systems here, Ms. Kovac. There are only relics." Ilara's gaze was steady. She looked past him at the window overlooking the launch pads where sleek, autonomous fighters sat gleaming in the desert sun. "Sometimes the old ways have value," she said, her voice quiet but clear, holding a weight that seemed disproportionate to the simple words. Vance gave a short, humorless laugh. "The old ways got us behemoth machines that required a pilot to have a death wish and the reflexes of a hummingbird on stimulants. We've evolved beyond that. Our pilots are system managers, strategic assets. We've removed the weak link. Human error." He closed the file with a soft, final thud. "My pilots are in the middle of critical readiness drills. Observe from the gallery. Write whatever report you need to write to justify your per diem. Just stay out of my operator's way." He dismissed her with a nod, his attention already returning to the comforting, orderly glow of his digital kingdom. Ilara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return and left the office, closing the door so softly it made no sound at all. She bypassed the main observation gallery, with its plush seats and hushed, reverent atmosphere. The low murmur of technicians and the self-important commentary of the young pilots held no interest for her. Instead, her quiet, beige presence drifted toward the periphery of the base, guided by a sense of memory that was older than the facility itself. She found what she was looking for in Hangar 7, a forgotten annex at the far end of the airfield, scheduled for demolition. The air inside was thick with the dust of disuse and the faint, nostalgic smell of hydraulic fluid and cold steel. There, under a heavy, gray tarp, sat a ghost. It was a Stalker-class interceptor, a machine from a different era. Low-slung, with a needle nose and aggressive, forward-swept wings, it was built for a single purpose: to be an extension of its pilot's will. It was all engine and cockpit, with none of the smooth, sensor-studded surfaces of the modern fighters outside. This was a creature of raw power and instinct. Alara pulled back a corner of the tarp. The canopy was coated in a fine layer of sand, but through it, she could see the Spartan cockpit, the worn grip of the control stick, the array of physical gauges and switches. She ran a hand along the cold, matte black fuselage, her touch lingering on a small, barely visible scorch mark near the port intake. Her expression remained placid, but a universe of feeling moved behind her eyes. Later, from a shadowed corner of the main command center, she watched the pilots. They swaggered out of the advanced simulators, laughing and boasting about their kill-to-loss ratios. They were young, sharp, and confident, their movements synchronized with the technology that enveloped them. They saw her standing there once, a drab figure against a wall of blinking lights, and their glances slid right over her, dismissing her as part of the architecture. She watched them on the main screens as they ran their exercises, their focus locked entirely on the data streams feeding their helmet displays. They fought the numbers, the icons, the predictive threat boxes. They never once looked at the simulated stars outside their digital canopies. Vance, wanting to impress a visiting general, ordered a Crimson Gauntlet simulation. It was the system's ultimate test, a brutal, multi-vector assault scenario designed to showcase the flawless integration of his automated defenses and the prowess of his pilots. The exercise began smoothly, a symphony of digital precision. Icons representing friendly and enemy craft danced across the main tactical display. Then, the scenario introduced its core challenge, a sophisticated electronic warfare attack, a ghost code that mimicked the quantum background noise of space itself. At first, it was just a flicker on a secondary screen. A technician frowned, tapping his console. Then the flicker became a wave. The main tactical display dissolved into a waterfall of static. Alarms, sharp and discordant, blared through the command center. "What is that? What's happening?" One of the pilots yelled, his voice tight with panic. "I've lost my HUD. All systems are offline. I'm flying blind." His simulated craft, deprived of its digital brain, began a fatal, uncontrolled spin. One by one, the other pilots reported the same catastrophic failure. Their advanced fighters were now just inert metal coffins adrift in a simulated void. The command center, a moment before a model of cool efficiency, descended into control chaos. "Reboot the network," Vance barked, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Isolate the corrupted code. Give me a diagnostic now." His voice was tight, the calm authority stripped away to reveal the raw nerve of a man watching his perfect machine break. Amidst the frantic movements and shouted commands, Alara remained perfectly still. She stood near the back, a small island of calm in a sea of rising panic. She wasn't watching the frantic technicians. She was watching the failing pilots, her eyes analytical, her expression unreadable. The technicians were helpless. The ghost code was rewriting their own diagnostic tools, turning their systems against them. The simulation was a complete rout. The last pilot's icon blinked out, a simulated kill confirming the utter failure of a multi-trillion-dollar defense system. As Vance slammed his fist onto his console in frustration, Alara moved. She walked not toward the main control hub, but to a dark, forgotten corner of the room where a decommissioned console sat like a museum piece. It was the manual interface for the old Stalker simulator, linked by a hard line to the mainframe, but in use for over a decade. Without a word, without asking for permission, she brushed the dust from its surface and began flipping a series of heavy toggle switches. The old machine hummed to life with a reluctant groan, its monochrome screen flickering with amber text. "Patch this console to the simulation mainframe," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the noise. Legacy Port 7 Alpha, a junior technician, his face pale with stress, stared at her, dumbfounded. Vance turned, about to snap at her for touching obsolete equipment, but something in her posture, an absolute certainty of purpose, made him hesitate. The technician, seeing Vance's pause, fumbled with his own console and complied. On the main tactical display, now mostly static, a new symbol appeared. It was simple, archaic, a single sharp chevron. Alara slipped on an old, crackling headset. She was in. She was flying the stalker. There was no HUD, no AI-assisted targeting, no friendly voice offering strategic advice. There was only the raw data stream, altitude, velocity, energy signatures, and the feel of the simulation through the old, heavy controls. Her movements were a revelation. Where the other pilots had been rigid, dependent on system locks, she was fluid, a predator. She didn't chase the enemy icons. She anticipated them, cutting them off, using their own speed against them. She dodged simulated missile locks with micro-adjustments, so fine they seemed precognitive. The command center fell silent. Everyone, from the panic pilots to the furious colonel, was now watching the lone chevron dance a deadly ballet across the screen. She dismantled the rest of the simulated enemy force in 93 seconds. Each kill was efficient, brutal, and devoid of flourish. The final enemy icon vanished, and the simulation ended. The main screen cleared, displaying the final score. A catastrophic failure for Ares Command's primary forces, and a perfect run by an unknown, unregistered participant. A heavy silence filled the room, thick with confusion and a dawning, uncomfortable respect. "My God," one of the young pilots whispered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Who is that?" All eyes turned to the woman standing at the old console. She was taking off the headset, her expression as placid as ever. Vance stared at her, then at the simple chevron still glowing on the screen. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind, forming a picture he didn't want to accept. It was Master Sergeant Cole, a grizzled veteran who maintained the base's physical infrastructure, who gave the ghost a name. He had been watching from the back, his eyes narrowed. He shuffled over to Vance, his voice a low rumble. "Colonel, you're too young to remember. Back before the network, before the autonomous fleets, there was a program. Black budget. So black it was practically a myth. Project Chimera." Cole pointed a thick finger at the chevron, then glanced at Alara, who was now quietly wiping her hands with a rag. They flew experimental craft, planes that didn't officially exist. They weren't pilots. They were something else, fused with their machines. They call signs. The best of them, the ones they sent into impossible situations alone, they were called Vipers. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That chevron, that was her mark. Viper, 9-inch. The real alarm came 3 days later. It wasn't a drill. A single, high-priority alert cut through the base's morning routine. A contact, unidentified, had breached the outer defense perimeter. It was high, fast, and almost completely invisible. It moved like a phantom, exploiting the microscopic gaps in their sensor grid. The automated defense cannons couldn't get a lock. The system's predictive algorithms were useless. The drone wasn't behaving like any known aircraft. It was a true ghost. 2 of the base's top pilots were scrambled in their state-of-the-art fighters. They streaked into the stratosphere, but their advanced sensors showed nothing. "Command, we have nothing on scope. This is a ghost," one of them reported, his voice tight with strain. On the tactical map, the intruder's path was a faint, intermittent line moving steadily toward a high-value satellite uplink. Panic, cold and real, began to seep into the command center. This wasn't a failed simulation. This was a prelude to decapitation. Vance stood before the main screen, his face grim. Every technological solution he had, every system he trusted implicitly, had failed him. His eyes scanned the room, a desperate search for an answer his computers couldn't provide. They landed on Alara. She was standing in her usual spot, observing, her calm a stark contrast to the rising tension. She hadn't spoken a word since the simulation. Vance walked over to her, his posture no longer that of a superior officer, but of a man out of options. "Ms. Kovac," he began, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "That thing up there, it's flying by feel, staying in the blind spots. Our systems can't track it." He paused, the question hanging in the air. "Can you?" Alara's gaze lifted from the tactical display to meet his. She gave a single, slow nod. Her eyes then moved towards the window, in the direction of the forgotten hangar. "Get the stalker fueled," she said, her voice even. "I need one clean, unencrypted comms channel. Nothing else." As the ground crew, now galvanized by a sense of awe and urgency, rushed to prep the stalker, Vance turned to Master Sergeant Cole. "I need the file. Project Chimera. Viper 9. Whatever clearances you have to break them." Cole nodded, understanding the gravity of the order, and disappeared into the records archive. While the hangar crew, including the two humble pilots who had just landed their useless advanced fighters, worked feverishly to get the old interceptor airworthy, Cole returned with a single, black data chip. It required Vance's command-level biometrics to open. The file that bloomed across his private screen was colder than the void of space. Project Chimera was a weapon of last resort. Its pilots were chosen for a rare neurological trait that allowed for a near-symbiotic link with their custom-built aircraft. They didn't fly the stalkers, they wore them. The file on Viper 9 was almost entirely redacted, but the fragments told a terrifying story. Solo deep atmosphere insertions over hostile continents. The neutralization of entire armored columns. A dogfight against a squadron of experimental enemy fighters where she was the only survivor. The stalker wasn't just an old plane. It was her plane, its systems hardwired to her unique neural patterns. The program had been terminated abruptly. The official reason was budget cuts. The classified addendum told the real story. The pilots had become too effective, too autonomous. The bond with their machines was so deep they were considered unstable, a new form of life that command could no longer control. Alara Kovac's official status was listed as decommissioned and retired, a sterile euphemism for a memory that was supposed to stay buried. Attached was a single, grainy photograph. A much younger woman, barely 20, leaning against the stalker's cockpit. Her eyes, even then, held the same unsettling calm, the same profound depth, a quiet fire that time had not extinguished, only banked. The stalker launched with a guttural roar that was wholly organic, a stark contrast to the electric whine of the modern fighters. It climbed almost vertically, a black dart disappearing into the piercing blue of the sky. In the command center, everyone watched in silence. The only sound was the faint hiss of the open comms channel Alara had requested. There were no data readouts from her plane, no telemetry. It was as if she had vanished. The ghost was hunting the ghost. Vance stood frozen, the contents of the black file searing his mind. He was no longer just watching a pilot. He was watching a living legend, a weapon they had tried to put back in its box. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The enemy drone continued its inexorable path, still just a faint whisper on their most sensitive instruments. The pilots and technicians held their breath, their faith in technology shattered, replaced by a primal hope in the one human who operated beyond it. Then, her voice broke the silence. It was as calm and clear as a winter morning, devoid of any stress or emotion. Target acquired. Engaging, there was no request for confirmation, no strategic update, just a statement of fact. A few heartbeats of absolute silence followed. The hiss of the channel seemed to amplify, filling the entire room. Then, her voice returned, just two words that landed with the force of a physical blow. Target neutralized. For a single, fleeting second, a bright flare appeared on the main tactical display, exactly where the drone was supposed to be. Its emergency transponder screaming its own death notice before it went dark forever. It was done. When the stalker's silhouette reappeared, descending for a perfect landing, a strange, electric tension filled the command center. As Alara walked back in, her face impassive, her beige clothes smudged with grease, the room fell utterly silent. Every single person, from the lowest-ranked technician to the humbled pilots, to Colonel Vance himself, rose to their feet. They stood at rigid, formal attention. It wasn't an order. It was a spontaneous, unified gesture of profound respect. Vance stepped forward, his face a mixture of awe and contrition. He didn't offer thanks or congratulations. Words were insufficient. He simply raised his hand in a slow, precise salute, a gesture of deference from a commander to a warrior. Alara looked at him, her eyes holding his for a long moment. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then she walked past them all and out of the room, leaving behind a silence that was louder than any cheer. Later that night, the noise and tension of the day had bled away, leaving only the quiet hum of the base at rest. Hangar 7 was a place of shadows and peace. Alara was there, alone with the stalker. The interceptor sat cooling in the dim light, its black skin seeming to drink the darkness. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the scent of spent fuel, the perfume of a mission completed. She ran her hand gently along its wing, her fingers finding the small scorch mark near the intake, as if greeting an old friend. With her thumb, she slowly, carefully wiped away a smear of oil from its fuselage, a gesture of quiet care, of communion. She stood there for a long time, her hand resting on the machine. Her gaze fell to her own wrist, where the faded tattoo of the coiled viper seemed to darken for a moment in the low light. It was a silent conversation between two halves of a single being, a woman and her weapon, both relics of a forgotten war, both still lethally sharp. From the deep shadows of the hangar doorway, Colonel Vance watched. He had come to say something. He wasn't sure what. To apologize? To thank her? To ask her to stay? But seeing her there, in her element, he understood that words had no place here. This was not about glory or recognition. It was something more fundamental. A bond, a purpose, a quiet strength that needed no audience and sought no approval. It was a truth the institution had forgotten, buried under layers of process and technology. He had witnessed the return of a ghost, and it had reminded him what true mastery looked like. Without making a sound, Vance turned and walked away, leaving her to the silence and the shadows. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light that cut through the gloom, illuminating the old interceptor and the woman who was its soul. Her power was not in what she said, but in what she did. It was a strength acknowledged, not explained, and its quiet echo would now resonate through the steel and